A prophet sits in the shadow of a crumbling empire. The smell of burning cedar hangs in the heavy air. To a grave in the early morning, fully expecting to anoint a rotting corpse. They look at the sheer panic. He is making a fiercely specific claim about human flesh, Jewish soil, and the biological process of decay. He is pointing at a sealed limestone cave and declaring that the heavy stone will be forcibly rolled backward. The tomb is not a permanent vault. It is a shattered trap. Peter is telling the crowd that the carpenter they crucified walked out of the shacket because the pit simply did not have the structural integrity to hold him down. The jaws of the earth tried to close over him, and the hinges snapped. David knew this centuries earlier, and Peter is watching it happen in real time. But a broken trap and a returning breath only answer how the grave was defeated. They do not answer when. To find the exact chronological timeline of this physical escape, you have to leave the kings and the prophets of Jerusalem. You have to travel north, into the ruins of a broken kingdom, and listen to a husband who is weeping over his faithless wife. Winter rain beats against a ruined stone wall in the northern kingdom. A prophet named Hosea stands in the mud of a shattered marriage and a dying nation. He watches the violent storm batter the dead soil. He speaks a timeline into the darkness. Look at Hosea chapter 6, verse 2 of the 1st century, and assume the concept of a dying and rising Messiah was entirely unprecedented. It is a strange, highly specific metric. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the 3rd day, he will raise us up. Most people read this as poetic hyperbole, a nice way of saying God will fix things eventually. They assume the timeline is just ancient exaggeration, but Jewish literature does not use the 3rd day as a random measure of time. The 3rd day is a deeply embedded literary pattern. Look closely at the Hebrew scriptures. Abraham walks toward Mount Moriah to sacrifice his only son. The terror is absolute. The journey feels like a funeral march. Deliverance arrives on the 3rd day. Joseph throws his brothers into a dark Egyptian prison. They sit in the blackness, waiting for a brutal execution. They are released on the 3rd day. Israel stands trapped at the base of Mount Sinai. The mountain shakes with smoke and fire. The presence of God descends on the 3rd day. Jonah is swallowed by a nightmare in the terrifying depths of the sea. The darkness crushes his lungs. The fish vomits him onto dry land on the 3rd day. Esther fasts in absolute silence to save a nation from total annihilation. The king extends his golden scepter on the 3rd day. Same clock, same pattern, same rescue. They assume the empty tomb was a divine plot twist, a last-minute rescue plan God decided to deploy at the end of the story. The 3rd day is not a casual metaphor. It is the exact moment the dead thing comes back to life. In the ancient Near Eastern mind, the 3rd day meant the danger had reached its absolute peak. It was the moment of biological verification. If a body was dead for 3 days, it was permanently gone. The spirit had abandoned the corpse. The decay was undeniable. The weeping was final. Day 1 is the shock of the trauma. Day 2 is the cold, suffocating reality of the grave. Day 3 is the absolute threshold of no return. So when Hosea points at the 3rd day, he is pointing at the exact moment when all human hope expires. He is choosing the precise second when the biological reality says the story is permanently closed. Hosea is telling a shattered nation that their exile, their death, their destruction is not the end of the narrative. It is just day 2. And day 2 is always dark. Day 2 is always silent. But day 3 operates on a different set of rules. And the key to understanding exactly what happens when that clock strikes 0 is found in a single Hebrew verb Hosea uses to describe the awakening. The heavy limestone wheel is locked in place. The Roman seal is unbroken across the rock. But if you look closer, if you look at the ancient Hebrew syntax, if you examine the specific vocabulary chosen by men, inside the burial chamber, the air is thick, with the sharp scent of myrrh and the iron smell of dried blood. A body lies completely motionless on a cold, flat slab of stone. The chest is perfectly still. The hands are tightly wrapped in linen. It is the dawn of the 3rd day. This is the exact moment Hosea is staring at from across the centuries. When the prophet stands in the mud of a ruined nation and speaks Hosea chapter 6, verse 2, he says, "On the third day he will raise us up, that we may live before him." The English phrase "raise us up" sounds like an external rescue operation. It sounds like a divine hand reaching down from the clouds to pull a passive victim out of a ditch. It sounds abstract, but the word Hosea actually shouts into the winter wind is the Hebrew verb kum. It appears over 600 times in the Old Testament, and its primary meaning is strikingly ordinary. It is not a mystical term. It means to stand. It means to rise from a prostrate position. It is the physical word used when a king rises from his throne. It is the word used when an army stands up for battle, who lived hundreds of years before a Roman cross was ever constructed. You start to see something the panic completely misses. When God commands Jonah to get off the ground and walk to Nineveh, the word is kum. When Abraham rises to bow before the Hittites, the word is kum. Centuries later, when Jesus walks into a house filled with the terrible wailing of professional mourners, he walks straight to the bed of a dead little girl. He takes her cold hand, and he speaks the Aramaic equivalent of this exact ancient root, Talitha Kumi, little girl, stand up. That single, ordinary verb changes everything about the terrifying silence in the tomb. Hosea is not predicting a philosophical rescue. He is not prophesying about a beautiful idea ascending into the heavens while a body rots in the dirt. He is describing a physical, skeletal motion. The resurrection is not a spiritual elevation. It is a dead man, simply standing up in the dark. The lungs violently draw in the nephesh Isaiah promised. The physical flesh shatters the boundaries of the shaket David sang about. The muscles obey the command of Kumam that Hosea set for the third day. 3 prophets. 3 ancient words. 1 unbreakable blueprint. They did not write a retroactive theology. They wrote the script. They laid down the exact biological metrics for the Messiah. Hundreds of years before he ever carried a heavy wooden beam through the streets of Jerusalem. But this blueprint was never meant to be locked inside a first-century grave. The empty tomb is not a sudden plot twist. It is the oldest promise on the page. This changes how you read. But here's the part I keep coming back to. The prophets did not press these words into rough parchment, merely to win a theological debate with a skeptical crowd centuries in the future. They wrote them because they knew. Eventually, you would find yourself sitting in the dark, staring at a heavy stone that refuses to move. If you are in a season where the timeline has completely expired, you are standing exactly where Hosea stood in the winter mud. You are sitting exactly where David sat on that freezing stone floor. If you are looking at a family, a diagnosis, or a calling that seems biologically, structurally, and utterly finished, you know the absolute terror of the silence. You know the heavy, metallic taste of day 2. You know the crushing physical weight of the shashat, the pit that closes its jaws over your head and tells you that your current darkness is your permanent address. You feel the slow, agonizing suffocation of the nephesh draining out of your chest as you wait for a rescue that seems horribly delayed. Most of us live our entire lives terrified of day 2. We assume the silence of the tomb means the absence of God. We look at the dead thing in front of us, the entire back half of your Bible. Because we have a habit of reading these ancient texts backward, we start at Easter Sunday. We smell the decay of our own failures. And we believe the biological reality is the final word on our identity. The resurrection is not an ancient history lesson. It is a present tense defiance. The blueprint that Isaiah, David, and Hosea laid down in the dirt of the ancient Near East is the exact same blueprint that operates in your own wilderness. The God who commands the breath to violently return to a crushed windpipe does not panic when your life looks like a grave. He is not intimidated by the traps that seem entirely inescapable to your human eyes. And he operates on a chronological clock that specializes in waiting until the absolute threshold of human despair. Your day 2 is not a burial. It is a blueprint. When you are trapped in the pit, the darkness is not a sign of abandonment. It is the prerequisite for the awakening. The command to stand up always comes when the limbs are the heaviest. But the detail that makes this completely remarkable is what happens when you finally see all of these ancient threads pulled tightly together into a single, undeniable fabric. A prophet writes about a crushed servant, and a dead man takes a sudden breath. A king sings in the dark about an inescapable pit, and try to project our modern theology onto the prophets. But they were not writing retroactive theology. They were writing in the middle, and the stone trap shatters. A broken husband announces a strict 3-day clock, and a ruined nation receives a rescue. A servant loses his nephesh under the terrifying weight of the world, and his throat violently pulls in the air. A holy one descends into the heavy reality of the Sheshat, and the jaws of the earth refuse to close. A body waits motionless on a cold slab until the third day dawns, and the muscles obey the ancient command to cum. A carpenter breathes his last on a Roman cross, and an entirely new creation stands up in the dark. Same blueprint, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is Hosea standing in the winter mud. Speaking that 3-day clock into the silence of a dying nation, he didn't just promise a rescue. He promised a rescue that deliberately waits until the absolute threshold of human despair, when the decay is undeniable and the weeping is final. If you are in a season where you are terrified of day 2, where the heavy, metallic silence of the grave is making you believe your calling, your family, or your future is completely finished, do not mistake the darkness for abandonment. The tomb is not a permanent vault. It is simply the place where the nephesh returns, of blood and dirt. They were staring at the raw reality of death, national death, physical death, spiritual death. If this opened something in you, subscribe, leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is sitting in the terrifying silence of day 2, waiting for the stone to move. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who has never once been intimidated by the darkness of the pit walk with you through your waiting, and speak the command to stand up exactly when all human hope expires. And they were daring to claim that the grave was not a permanent address. You can hear it in the rhythm of their ancient Hebrew. He presses a reed pen into rough animal skin. He describes a man crushed, a man pierced. They do not speak in vague spiritual metaphors. They do not talk about a soul floating off to a distant cloud. They use concrete, anatomical language. They write about breath violently returning to lungs. They write about physical flesh escaping a physical pit. They write about an exact chronological clock ticking in the dark. To feel the weight of this blueprint, you cannot start in a garden outside Jerusalem. You have to start with the most famous, most heavily debated scroll in the entire Old Testament. A text so specific, Ar Asa, so vivid, that ancient readers debated how it could possibly be true. It is the song of a servant who takes the violence of the world into his own body, a servant who breathes his last, a servant who goes into the ground. But the detail that changes everything is what happens after the dirt covers him. When you unroll the great Isaiah scroll, found in the dry, suffocating air of the Qumran caves, you are looking at a document that existed centuries before the Roman Empire perfected the art of crucifixion. The ink on the cracked leather tells a story that makes no logical sense. It is the portrait of a suffering servant, a man buried with the wicked in a rich man's tomb. A king stands on a cold stone balcony in Jerusalem. When scholars examine the poetic structure of Isaiah 53, they notice a sharp, jarring pivot. For verses 1 through 9, the momentum is entirely downward. It is a descent into absolute darkness. The Hebrew verbs are heavy and violent, despised, rejected, pierced, crushed, oppressed, afflicted. The sensory reality is brutal. You can hear the sound of the shearers. You can see the disfigured appearance. The text drags the reader down into the dust of the grave alongside the servant. The grave is absolute. The prophet explicitly states that this man is assigned a resting place with the wicked. The violence has finished its work. The breathing has stopped. The stone is heavy, the air is cold, and the story is over. But then, in verse 10, The Hebrew grammar shatters the biological reality. After stating clearly that the Lord makes the servant's life an offering, for sin, a fatal sacrifice, the very next phrase says, "He will see his offspring and prolong his days." A dead man does not have days to prolong, and a buried corpse does not see anything. For centuries, readers tried to resolve this tension by spiritualizing the text. They assumed Isaiah was speaking in poetic abstractions. They reasoned that the servant's offspring meant his philosophical followers. The chill of a Judean midnight bites at his skin. He plucks the strings of a harp. He sings into the dark. They argued that his prolonged days simply meant his teachings would echo through the generations, carrying his memory forward. They tried to soften the paradox by turning it into an idea. The text is not a metaphor for a lingering legacy. It is a biological promise. Isaiah is not describing a good teacher who dies and is remembered fondly by his students. He is describing a dead man who stands back up in the light. He is describing a physical reversal of a biological finality. The prophet is claiming that the grave is merely a transition phase, a temporary holding cell before the servant walks out and goes back to work. And the proof is not found in the smoothed-out phrasing of our English Bibles. The proof is hiding in a single, visceral Hebrew noun in verse 11, a word that most modern translations render simply as life or soul, completely stripping away the gritty, physical reality of what Isaiah actually wrote on the parchment. Picture a rabbi unrolling a heavy parchment scroll in a dusty first-century synagogue. Dust dances in a single, sharp shaft of morning light. A silver pointer scrapes across the cracked, animal skin leather. He drags it carefully over the consonants of Isaiah chapter 53. Verse 11. English translators often handle this verse with extreme caution. They translate it gently. The standard English versions usually say something like, "About a body that will not see corruption. A broken husband walks through the ruins of a faithless nation. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see light and be satisfied." It sounds peaceful. It sounds like a man achieving inner tranquility after a difficult emotional struggle. It sounds completely abstract and spiritual. But the word translated soul here is the Hebrew nephesh. It appears over 700 times in the Old Testament, and it almost never means a disembodied, immortal spirit floating around inside a physical shell. The root of nephesh is fiercely biological. It points directly to the physical throat. It is the gullet. It is the windpipe. It is the raw, animal necessity of breathing, eating, and thirsting. Look back at the very beginning of the biblical story. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. God forms a man from the dirt. He breathes into the nostrils of the corpse. And the text explicitly says Adam became a living nephesh, a breathing creature. When a deer pants for the water brooks in Psalm 42, it is the nephesh that is panting. It is a dry throat desperate for moisture. It is biology crying out for survival. That root changes everything about the servant in the grave. When Isaiah describes the anguish of the servant's nephesh, he is not talking about an existential crisis. He tastes the dust of an impending exile on the dry wind. He watches winter rain wash over dead soil. He is talking about suffocation. He is talking about a windpipe crushed under the unbearable weight of a Roman execution. He is describing a throat that can no longer draw air. The breathing has stopped. The nephesh is entirely empty. And then, the verse abruptly pivots. He shall see light. The resurrection is not a spiritual metaphor. It is oxygen filling a dead man's lungs. Isaiah is not predicting a lingering memory that brings warm comfort to his followers. He is predicting a sudden, exhalant, biological inhale in the total darkness of a sealed tomb. The throat opens. The breath returns. The man stands up. This physical reversal of death is staggering, but Isaiah was not the first one to put it on paper. 3 centuries before this prophetic scroll was written, a different leader faced the terror of the grave. He did not write a prophecy about a nameless servant. He sat alone in the night and wrote a song about a king. A king sits on a cold stone floor in Jerusalem. The oil in a clay lamp burns low, casting long, trembling shadows against the thick limestone walls. The air smells of an extinguished wick, mixed with the faint, metallic scent of his own sweat. He plucks a single string on a wooden harp. He speaks a strict, unbending timeline into existence. 2 days of death, a third day of rising. The sound vibrates through the hollow chamber and fades into the crushing silence of the night. He is David, the shepherd who became a warlord, the warlord who became a monarch. He has seen thousands of men die. He has walked through valleys, literally littered with the bleached bones of his enemies. He knows exactly what happens when the breathing stops. He has buried his own infant son in the dirt. He knows the smell of decay. He knows the absolute, undisputed victory of the grave. But tonight, his pen moves in a different direction. This is not a political document. It is a biological defiance. If something about reading these ancient texts is raw, physical history, rather than spiritual metaphor, is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So David keeps singing in the dark. He writes the words that will become Psalm 16. He sings about a refuge. He sings about a chosen portion. And then he arrives at verse 10. And he sings a physiological impossibility. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. The warrior who has watched 1,000 bodies decay suddenly claims that a body will not rot. The king who knows the grave always wins suddenly declares that the pit will be denied its prize. 3 men, 3 centuries, 3 crises. Same blueprint. Most people assume the resurrection of Jesus was a surprise. He does not say the spirit will escape to the clouds while the body decays in the earth. He explicitly says his flesh will dwell securely. David will eventually die. David will be buried. His bones will turn to dust in a royal tomb that still exists in the 1st century. But the words he writes are not about him. He leaves a breadcrumb in the text. He uses a hyper-specific noun for the grave that will sit silently on the parchment for 1,000 years. It will wait in the dark until a fisherman named Peter stands up in a crowded street in Jerusalem and uses that exact word to prove that a crucified carpenter is the ruler of the cosmos. And to understand Peter's explosive argument, you have to dig into the dirt of what that ancient Hebrew word actually means. Acts chapter 2, verse 7-7. Peter is standing in front of a massive, chaotic crowd in a sweltering Jerusalem street, mere weeks after a brutal Roman execution just outside the city walls. He quotes David's Midnight Song verbatim to prove a biological impossibility to thousands of skeptics. He tells them, leaning on the text, "You will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption." But the word David, originally pressed into the parchment for corruption in the ancient Hebrew, is the noun shachat. They read the gospel accounts of the disciples hiding in terror behind locked doors. They picture the women carrying spices. It appears roughly 23 times in the Old Testament. And it is not a sterile, philosophical term for passing away or fading into memory. The root verb means to ruin, to decay, to physically rot away into liquid and dust. But as a noun, shachat almost always refers to a very specific, physical trap. It is a pit. It is a dark, subterranean cistern carved out of solid limestone, often covered with a heavy, immovable rock, used to capture wild animals or to hold forgotten political prisoners in absolute blackness. It is the exact word used in Isaiah 38, when a dying king Hezekiah praises God for dragging his body back from the pit of destruction. It is the same inescapable trap Job laments when he feels his own skin failing and his bones aching in the ash heap. A shachet is not a state of mind. It is a hole in the earth designed to swallow a body completely, a set of stone jaws that close over your head and refuse to open. That physical reality changes everything about what Peter is arguing on the day of Pentecost. When David sings that God will not let his Holy One see the shachat,